is Les Evans, an executive mentor and international speaker from Canada. His business experience is diverse and very intriguing to me. Beginning as a successful professional entertainer and award winning songwriter, he went on to found a boutique investment firm. Today, Les is a highly respected business mentor. He is the behind the scenes success secret of some of the world's most famous and powerful individuals. His remarkable client roster includes movie and TV stars, Olympic gold medalists, a billionaire, rock stars, congressmen and governors, top models, billion-dollar CEOs, attorneys, physicians, and royals. As a top international speaker, Les has wowed audiences all over the world in 78 cities in 24 countries. And though all of these things, the business, the speaking, the rich experience, and vast knowledge are fascinating, we've decided not to talk about business. Welcome, dear Les. Oh, feeling excited to have you on Theorem is an understatement.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I know the first time we spoke, we really connected. So I was equally excited to be here, your evening and my morning. So,
Well, let's start this off by your story of this past year. How this path of yours has led you to think about business in a more right brain side, you know?
well, I'll tell you that's a really good observation, and I think it's timely and appropriate for the world we're living in right now. Last year, I turned 60 years of age, June
Mm-hmm.
9th, last year. And I was thinking of my birthday. Yes, 62 I was born in. So there's 60 years. Wow. It just goes by so fast. But, and it was funny when you were reading biography, I was listening back to that and I was thinking, gosh, did I really do that? And yes, I really did all that stuff. Seems amazing because it sounds like they're talking about somebody else, but this is a real flesh and blood human being. And being a human being, we are flesh and blood creatures, and we are, to my way of thinking, we are very much spiritual beings
Mm-hmm.
living in, living in the biology we do. But the world we live in is so, I might say these days, really almost anti-human because we're putting such tremendous stresses on ourselves, and that includes myself. And I found myself, to your point, getting at age 60 where it was starting to wear me down. And I think it's particularly the last couple of years, we've all suffered a great deal physically, financially, mentally, spiritually, just due to the
Mm-hmm.
stresses of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with age, and part of it's age because your hormones change and all these things. I found myself slowing down, and I was like, "Hey, wait a minute, what happened?" You're starting to feel your age, and I was putting on weight, and I was getting, joint pains and inflammation in my body, and getting hard to breathe, and all these different things. And I was like, whoa, 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 time out right here. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized, because I am a human being just like everybody else, that there was many things that were affecting me on an emotional basis. And we live in a world today that is really forcing us to live on our heads. And when I say our heads, I'm talking about our conscious brain or our left brain, the logical brain. Everything today is listen to the science and left brain, left brain, left brain. And we've started to remove the things that make us human. And this, to my mind, is a very deliberate attempt by the powers that be to kind of take away and weaken our humanity, because the things that come from the other parts of our spirit and soul, things like love and joy and family and nature,
Mm-hmm.
we're just constantly being pulled away from those things, like art, music, literature, all these wonderful things of creation that have been so de-emphasized, and everything's just about, well, here's your job, do this, etc., etc. And so I'm kind of really glad that we're not talking about business and tactics and business strategies,
Uh-huh.
because that's, you can learn business tactics and strategies practically anywhere. But the true engine of a business as a whole is the human being inside. And I think we're finally starting to see a bit of a shift now where, listen, if you want your business to thrive, if you want business success, you have to have personal success. And personal
Mm-hmm.
success means that we must, deal with the internal part. Now, I
Yes.
have to be quite honest with you. Uh, 10 years ago, I would have been a typical male, just like a lot of us are. I'm going to call out the men here who would say, you know what, don't bother me with that woo woo stuff, right? Because you'd hear terms about self care and shadow work. And coming from the age that I did, I'd be going, well, what is that? Like, that's weakness. That's weakness,
Yes.
but it
Yes.
is not weakness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is again the era I grew up with. We tend to think of this stuff as a weakness. And so when you fast forward, you realize that it is not a weakness to take a look at the human being and say, holy mackerel, I am not a machine. We are, we're not thinking machines that feel once in a while. We are feeling spirits that
Uh-huh.
think occasionally.
Yes.
so and so coming around kind of full circle to what you were saying last year on my birthday, I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. Where is it written that after 60, you're supposed to kind of decline there? And I said, what if the opposite is true? What if I decided to make this next decade my best? And so I thought, well, there's an intriguing thought. And there was a challenge, right? And so I took a look at everything. I looked at the work I was doing. I looked at the way I was eating, obviously, the exercise, but also the mental aspects of things.
Mm-hmm.
And also, being somebody who studied neuroscience for the past 3 years, I learned a really intimate connection by the way our subconscious mind works, the three parts of our brain and also the heart. And I was like, hey, we have to recognize all of these elements. Now the challenges, my friend, is there has been a massive push, and I think technology is really a double-edged sword these days because it is literally hijacked what's called our hedonic set point.
Mm-hmm.
And a hedonic set point is things like this. Normally, for example, before we had the internet, um, you would get your reward long term. In other words, long term gratification, right? It was delayed gratification. If you would get into shape, it would take some work, and then you would get the gratification of eventually you get the result. Maybe you get in shape, you feel better, etc., etc. That's our natural way of being. But today, we're so used to having our dopamine button pushed, several thousand times a day that it's hijacked our process. And so we find things that would bring us a great result to be boring and difficult when actually, in point of fact, they're supposed to be. And so a lot of what I did in that process was to uh, and I've taught this to people over the last few months, is to retrain and reprogram yourself to get away from those triggers.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I changed my schedule, for example, so that I have very little time in the evening to watch television. I mean, very little, like a half hour, if that. I'm ready for bed. You know what I mean? So, I don't have time for certain things. So, there was quite a process there. But what I really did was to go back to the human parts and focus on what are the things that bring my life value, things and people. Who are the people that bring my life value, and what are the things that bring my life value? And I want to focus on those things. And so, if a thing or a person does not bring value to my life, or if I can't add value to theirs, I'm going to really drastically restrict the amount of time in that activity or that person.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do that because there's only 24 hours a day. So that
Yes.
was a big thing, right? And the other thing was to start to really focus on the things that were truly important into my life. One of the things that's interesting is the concept of joy. you know Children naturally express joy, but as adults, we tend to suppress it, and we suppress it in others. We hate seeing people being happy because it makes us miserable. But just that natural human emotion of joy was to get back into my life and say, what are the things that bring me joy? Now, that's an individual question
Uh-huh.
for everybody. What brings somebody joy does not bring to another. but it can be the simplest thing. Like I loved cartoons when I was growing up as a child. And just as silly as and quaint as they are, the old fashioned cartoons, they still make me laugh. That brings me joy. My other favorite thing that brings me joy is the ability to write and perform music, something that I hadn't done in years. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
year, I'm going to, at age 60, I'm going to write some new songs, original songs, and I'm going to make a plan to go perform them live because this is a God given talent that I have. So all of this effort combined, put together, really changed things dramatically for me. I lost like in pounds because we're in Canada. We use metric and imperial systems, so it's a little
Uh-huh.
confusing. But it would be like 20 some kilos, 55 pounds in 5 months, and I've maintained that. I've kept that off. So got into shape, just and people can't believe I'm 60. I talk to easily 10 coaching, mentoring clients a day, and they're like, "You don't sound like you're 60." And I said, "Well, what's that supposed to sound like?" Right? So, anyway, so that's been the journey over the last year, and it was really a challenge to myself, but to prove to other people that it doesn't matter what age you're at, you can always reinvent yourself. If you don't like who you were before, that's fine. All you have
Mm-hmm.
to do is say, okay, sometimes it's the person we don't want to be anymore that gives us that inspiration to become who we do want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you said the sentence when you reach a point when you don't like yourself anymore. And
Hmm.
I think that um, we 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 get there sometime in our life when we don't like what we see in the mirror. And I would like you to talk to me about what was the process that you followed to actually see what it is that you want. You mentioned the joy, you mentioned the feeling more aligned with your values. And
Hmm.
because it's not always easy to take away all the filters and really see what it is that you want in order for you to get it.
Yeah. Well, the first, and that's another great question. I never even thought of that because I kind of just did it intuitively. So this is interesting for me to explore this. Um, One of the first things I did, because we have a lot, let's start with this. We
Hmm.
have a lot of noise in our lives. And I
Oh
think you
yes,
just
we do.
mentioned that, right? And I mean, it's just like 24/7. So I realized that I needed some quiet time and me time, as we all do, because we're human beings.
Hmm.
And for me, the adjustment was to start getting up early in the morning, go
Hmm.
to bed earlier at night, get up earlier in the morning. I usually wake up before my wife a little bit, not too much. And I started a daily ritual. And the daily ritual consists of me just getting out of bed and doing something automatically so the day starts. So the first thing I do is we have fresh berries every morning with breakfast, and because berries are very very good for you, they're low in sugar, they're excellent in phytonutrients and antioxidants. So it's like raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. And so I get up at first thing in the morning. When I go down, I put on some coffee. I only drink coffee in the morning, that's it. I have 1 cup. I have it here, this is it. When this is gone, that's it. So but I put that on automatically without thinking, and I prepare, kind of wash the berries and get them arranged, etc.,
Hmm.
etc., and I
Hmm.
set them out. And then what I do is I have a workout room in my home, and 6 days a week, generally speaking, just go right down there, start going through my stretching exercises, and start doing a workout routine again without thinking. It's
Hmm.
just become automatically. Now, part of that was training in my mind, first of all, to go to your point, was because I knew it was going to take time. I mean, if it took me 60 years to get out of shape, it was going to take a few days to get into shape. But I realized the power of what I call incremental progression. In
Hmm.
other words, you may feel like a fool for starting with only one push up, for example. But you know what? That one push up is one more than you've done for the last 3 years. So that's a
Yes.
success. And then
Yes.
day two, it's two push ups, and day three it's three push-ups, etc., etc. It's to the point where you get in 6 8 weeks you can do 5 sets of 10 perhaps. So it's incremental progression, and I train myself to reward myself again, resetting what's called the hedonic set point,
Mm-hmm.
rather than beat myself up for just doing one push up. Because here's what a lot of people do. They say, okay, I'm going to get to the gym. And they rush out there. They haven't been in doing anything for 2 or 3 or 5 years. They overdo it, and then they put themselves in traction for the next 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they feel they're trying to compensate for the guilt of not working out. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that to myself. Why beat myself up? So I'm going to do one push up, and I'm going to promise myself to do that. And I'm not going to do two, because to your point about integrity, integrity is keeping your word to yourself first.
Yes.
So I'm going to do one push up today. I'm not going to do two. My reward for doing one push up is I don't have to do another one today. And I got to do a little happy dance with that. But this is how I started to reprogram
Mm-hmm.
my way of doing it, so that everyday exercising became a reward unto itself. So I'm rewarding myself daily, not for what I haven't done, but what I have accomplished. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense to you?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is how I started to do that. And similarly with diet, the one thing I noticed for myself particularly, because I have an autoimmune disease I've had since I'm 23 years old, carbohydrates create tremendous inflammation in my body.
Mm-hmm.
They just do, because of this autoimmune disease. And so when I started to restrict them, I noticed a gradual lessening of the inflammation. And pretty soon it was all but gone. And I thought, well, is that my imagination? Maybe I'll just test it. So I'd go back and add carbohydrates to my diet for 2 or 3 days. And sure enough, wow, I'm in pain again. So again, just setting up kind of these psychological rewards is how I started to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
with the morning routine, to your point, after I'd have exercise and maybe I would get up and I would take my journal and I would start to write down in a quiet space, what what are my greatest gifts? What are
Mm-hmm.
my God-given talents? And I've been blessed with a lot of them. I believe we all have talents. Usually, if you have a talent for something, it means you have the God-given genetic ability to do that, and you have the internal desire to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of, in my opinion, that's where God's end of the bargain stops, because then you have to get to work, because the
Uh-huh.
rest is all work. you know, uh, I can have musical talent, but it takes work to write music. It's not easy. It's sometimes it comes easy, sometimes it doesn't. Um, so writing down, what are my God-given gifts? Because there's, and I'm not here to preach to anybody, but it's interesting in the New Testament. There's the parable of the talents, which is about people having been given talents, and if you don't use them, they're going to be taken away. And I realized that a long time ago, that everything we have in our life is on loan. Everything, all our possessions, the people in our lives, and our talents, eventually it'll all be taken away. And if we don't use those talents, what are they there for? They are there to make other people's lives better. So I don't look at my talents as my talents. They're my God's talents that I've been given to use for other people. So going back to that, what am I best at? What are my God-given talents? What can I do more easily that comes more difficulty to other people? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people have tremendous difficulty with public speaking. To me,
Mm-hmm.
public speaking is like breathing. It's the most natural, easiest thing in the world. I can walk on a stage in 5,000 people and not even blink. You know, that's a God-given talent.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's starting to focus on that. And then, what are the things in my life, like you said a few minutes before, that are not bringing value? Well, does watching Netflix for 3 hours a day bring value? No, it doesn't. Does being on my phone all the time bring me value? No. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary, it makes things worse. So,
Mm-hmm.
another thing I did, funny enough, and this is not too long ago, about 3 weeks ago, I because I realized this was another thing.
Mm-hmm.
We all have addictions. This is one of them. And I would have a terrible habit of going on and reading my Twitter feed, because I like to be up to date on politics. Well, that's the worst thing you could do for going for bed. So now at 8 o'clock in the evening, this gets turned off, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't get turned on until 8 o'clock in the morning. And much to my wife's joy, by the way. So there, this was another thing, and I shared this with a friend of mine who wanted to know kind of my secret for the last 6 months. And I said, turn your phone off, seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a dramatic improvement in your mood and emotion because you're not drinking in this garbage every single day. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I got that process started, is taking the quiet time in the morning to kind of focus, and then even just writing out like one or two things. What am I grateful for? I gotta be honest, and I'm almost ashamed to say, for so many years, I could never understand why people are saying, "Oh, be grateful, be grateful." I'm like, why? I had such a very, I don't know where that came from, such a cynical attitude. But I realized that when you actually sat down and counted your blood, even the smallest thing, like tomorrow, this morning, it's streaming in here. This is a beautiful sunrise this morning, and a huge, gorgeous moon on the other side. I was like, wow, that's phenomenal just to get to see that, you know. So gratitude, and it doesn't have to be a massive exercise. It can be, you don't have to write 20 things. It can be one or two things,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I'm very grateful to my son. For the first time, he's a film director. He's going to the Cannes Film Festival this year as a professional for the first time.
Wow.
That, as a father, is a huge achievement for him
Yeah.
and me, just as his father.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so I'm very excited about that. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. So you described a number of, may I call them micro steps that you took
Mm-hmm.
that allowed you to have clarity. And
Yep.
this clarity is not an easy thing to have in a way because of all this noise around us. And you
Mm-hmm.
achieved it through doing your having your routine and taking some steps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you realized the things that you wanted in your life and the things that you didn't want anymore.
Yep.
So, how did that help you? This information helped you feel that you're getting closer to your integrity.
Well, it's interesting. I used an exercise which I'll share with you.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those exercises was making a list.
Mm-hmm.
And on the left, you take a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle. And on the left hand side, you make what's called a stop doing list.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things in my life that I need to stop doing? And I'll tell you, that is a difficult exercise. It's a profound exercise, because part of it is, it's not only like I need to stop eating potato chips. Okay, that's an obvious one, for example. But it's also, I need to stop lying to myself about this. I
Ooh.
need, yeah, right?
Yep.
And that's a tough one. That's a really
Yes.
tough one, to say, where am I need to stop giving myself more credit than credit's due here,
Mm-hmm.
because we tend to make up a lot of stories about ourselves, and it is difficult to take the mirror and say, what do I need to stop doing? So
Mm-hmm.
I part of that equation was the right hand side, which is, I need to start doing these things. So
Mm-hmm.
starting exercise was a clear one. Starting a much better diet was one of them. But also to start, stop reading the negative information on the political stuff. And the reason why is, I came to the conclusion that I was lying to myself, thinking that I was keeping myself informed. But the
Mm-hmm.
truth is there's so much misinformation and disinformation
Ooh,
today. It's
yes.
almost impossible to decide what is accurate and what is
Mm-hmm.
not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
either way, it's massive psychological warfare. And so I wasn't keeping myself informed. I was subjecting myself to psychological warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a tough thing to admit to yourself, that, hey, maybe there are, and this is difficult for a lot of people to accept, I think, particularly nowadays, is that maybe there are people in the world that do not have our best interests in mind. And so we have to look after ourselves, right? It's a
Hmm.
pretty crazy world. So that stop doing list was, which is an interesting component to take the other side, of course, is the start doing list. So I started with the start doing list, but then on the stop doing list came the next question: what are the things and activities I need to restrict?
Hmm.
That's a big one, because clarity is more about taking away than
Hmm.
adding to,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
As once Michelangelo was once asked, he's like, how do you create, the Pieta, for example, or the Statue of David, or these amazing sculptures? And he said it's actually, I beg your pardon, relatively simple. I imagine the sculpture and then I simply remove what is not necessary.
Wow.
And that's brilliant, right?
Hmm.
So this is how you get clarity in your life, is removing what is not relevant. And in the stop doing list, I did a time audit on myself. What am I spending my time on during the day? And I will tell you, when you first do that, it's a big shock.
Hmm. Yes,
You don't
I bet.
realize how much, like 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here, half hour here, and just it's gone. So that was a real task doing that. So
Hmm.
now I'm very, like, my schedule is very very focused. I mean, I do probably more in a day than most people would get done in a month. I mentor 10 people a day. That's that's 50 a week. That's 200 in a month. That's a heavy duty schedule, but I can
Hmm.
manage it because I don't waste time on non functions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Make sense?
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. And I'm wondering, you've done all this work and you have achieved a level of clarity and, of course, integrity that we were talking about. And so, how do you use this? How does it make you feel? What changed inside you?
Um, well, that's an interesting thing, right? Because the word integrity, a lot of people tend to interchange it with honesty.
Yes.
But in point and fact, they're two different things. That's why we have
Hmm.
two different words. Integrity generally means consistency within, like wholeness.
Yes.
So if we say a spaceship has integrity, it means all the parts are working together. And integrity in behavior means I'm walking my talk. So
Yes.
a lot of people talk about leadership, and we hear this all the time: leadership. Yeah, we be a leadership. But the thing is, you can't truly be a leader until
Hmm.
you've led yourself. And that includes being brutally honest with your human flaws, you
Hmm.
know? And I run into that all the time. And we have to give ourselves some slack here too, because we are just human. And to
Hmm.
be quite fair, we're being beat up by so many influences. I mean, we're influenced by the media, we're influenced by television. There is a lot of negative influence, and people think that stuff doesn't work. It does work. For example, it really is powerful. And it's interesting. I saw a gentleman talking about the only drug he wasn't warned about, which I
Hmm.
thought was really interesting. And in this particular case, he was talking about alcohol in society. And he had become, like, drinking had just completely gotten reckless in his life. And he said, this is the only drug they never warned me about. In school, they taught, they said, don't use hard drugs, don't smoke this, don't do that, this, that. But they never told me about alcohol. And he said, why is it that alcohol is the only drug you have to apologize quitting for? And I got thinking about that. And I said, yeah, that's right. Because it's a really strange thing in our society.
Hmm.
Like, if
Hmm.
you go to somebody and you said you had a drug problem and you said you quit drugs, they'd be good for you, right? But if you go to a party and they say, no, thanks, I don't drink, they're like, well, why not? Right? So that's a curious anomaly. And he was talking about how much influence the advertising world has on certain things that are
Yes.
detrimental to our health, like smoking, et cetera, et cetera, et
And
cetera.
so many other things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, including, a lot of fast food snacks and things like that. And by the way, one of the apps I use to check foods. I'm just trying to remember what it's called. It starts with a Y. You can actually Yuka. which is a
Mm-hmm.
really terrific app. I might just want to recommend this. I'm not sure if it's available where you're at, but it allows you to go in a store and scan food products and skincare products, and it'll immediately tell you what kind of chemicals and things are in there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something my wife and I, Yuka, it's Yuka, it's just brilliant. We use it when we're buying different foods and things like that, because sometimes you get a real shock. Some of the most famous brands in the world are just filled with all sorts of chemicals. And as you're well aware, when it comes to health, it's not only just what you're putting in, but also what's on your body, your skincare products, for
Yes,
example,
yes.
because skin is the big absorption patch, right? So that was another thing. But to circle back to what you were saying, I think anyone who feels that they're in alignment with themselves, that are walking their talk, you're going
Mm-hmm.
to have far more influence with the people in your community.
Mm-hmm.
My father is a great example of somebody who walks his talk.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very spiritual man. He's a very moral, principled man. He doesn't brag about it. He doesn't preach about it. Who he is so strong, it shows up 5 minutes before he gets into the room. So I think that's the key, is if you really want to be a leader. And listen, this is not easy to do. This is a lifetime thing of trying not to be hypocritical
Mm-hmm.
in who
Mm-hmm.
you are.
Yes.
It's difficult to walk your talk, very difficult, but it is a noble and worthwhile pursuit. And anytime that you're working towards that, I mean, success, the best definition of success I ever heard was success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that. The progressive realization of a worthy ideal, meaning that we're always working on it consistently. And I
Yes.
think if you're a person who is doing that, you should really give yourself a pat on the back. You're allowed to stumble, you're allowed to fall, you're allowed to make mistakes. That's okay. But it's the progressive realization. And that's why I'm such a fan of, again, this principle of incremental progression, just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit every day, a little bit every day. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the rocks in the world in canyons, they weren't worn down in a day. That's years and years of drip, 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 right?
Yes.
And so it is with our lives.
So you talk about how so many elements around us shape us and influence us, but you've
Hmm.
reached a point that you decided to look within and really see what your talk is in order to walk it. And
Hmm.
I would like to ask you now about how this can be implemented uh, when doing business. So, um, we talked about the left brain and the right brain, and how can a business person, an entrepreneur, use their intuition, use their heart when doing business.
Okay, that's a good question. So, in order to do that, let's make a little distinction here. Let's talk about neuroscience just a little bit, and we'll make
Of
that
course.
distinction, because this is an excellent question. So, having studied this subject for a few years, people make a bit of confusion between instincts and intuition.
Yes. Hmm.
Instincts and intuition. Now, interestingly enough, as we all know, animals in the animal kingdom are born with instincts far more than human beings. Like, for example, if you've seen a little colt, a small horse being born, I mean, within minutes they can stand up, which is incredible. I mean, human beings take forever. So, human beings, by contrast, we're born with only two or three natural instincts. One is a fear of loud sounds, obviously. Another is a fear of heights, for good reasons. And the third instinct we have is to suckle at our mother's breast for breastfeeding.
Hmm.
That's a natural instinct. So, human beings, though, every other instinct we have is learned. And that's where it gets tricky, because it's not really an instinct per se, it's a learned behavior.
Hmm.
And sometimes learned behaviors, our brain, just to break this down very quickly, I mean, there's three parts to our brain. This is the logical part right here. You tap yourself on the forehead. That's the neocortex. It's very, very smart. It does all the mathematics, all the left brain planning, engineering, scheming, whatever. It's very smart, but it's very slow, and it is a gas guzzling pig, as I like to say, because it requires a tremendous amount of caloric response.
Mm-hmm.
It takes about 30% of our energy,
Yes.
which is why people who are thinking, really hard, it wears you out physically. So then over on these sides above your ears is kind of our mammalian brain. That's where our emotions come from, all our creative space. And then in the very back, kind of in the brainstem, is the primal brain, which is called our amygdala. And the amygdala is primal, but it's very fast. To compare the amount of information that it can take in, this would be a drinking straw. This would be Niagara Falls. So the amount of information your subconscious brain can process is extraordinary. Now, here's the interesting challenge. Every day, this is something I learned in neuroscience. Every day, the average person on their phone scrolls the length of the Empire State Building in the United States. I mean, think about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. And so we're so overwhelmed with information today, this brain cannot even process that, not even close. So what happens is our primal brains start to make all these shortcuts to make sense of all this information. And
Mm-hmm.
particularly today, we are more stressed with information than ever before. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're biologically not really equipped to live in this environment because think about it. Good grief, in the 1950s. I remember growing up as a child, driving out to the farm, and maybe you listen to the radio, you know, but you get out to the farm and all you hear is animals and birds chirping. That's it. So there wasn't all this noise and distraction. We didn't have constant social media, all this different stuff. So to that point, what happens is our brain is so overwhelmed, it starts making all these different kinds of connections. And a lot of them tend to be false connections.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is the way our brains work is if we observe something, something happens, an event, and we're in a high emotional state, it tends to get imprinted in our brains. And the brain says, okay, the next time that happens, I know what to do. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily the correct response
Mm-hmm.
because it's a primal response. It's an instinct that we've learned. And a lot of times, these instincts, for example, really hold us back. So if you're talking in business, like you just asked me, sometimes we'll try something brand new, we'll take a risk, and boom, it doesn't work. And so we get literally what's called a habenular scar in our brain. It's kind of like when you touch the stove and you're too hot as a child, right? Your brain creates a scar there to say, hey, don't do that again, or else. So the same is true in business. If we
Mm-hmm.
take a risk and something doesn't work, we approach somebody we're attracted to and they
Mm-hmm.
shut us down, we're rejected, we get a habenular scar. And so
Yes.
the brain is always trying to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that instinct does not serve us if we want happiness. We have to be able to challenge that all the time. Now, compare that to the heart, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists have now proved they did experiments where they would uh, hold flashcards in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to get see if they could guess what the card would be, like a playing card, like a spade or a joker or something like this. What was really interesting is they wired up their brains. They also wired the heart, and they found that when they would pull the card up, the heart would be able to anticipate what that card was far faster than the brain, and it was right more often. And they
Wow.
called it heart conduction velocity.
Uh-huh.
And so your intuition, which comes from the heart here, and we could say that's the fourth part of the brain, even though it's not the brain per se, this is the smartest thing going. Your
Mm-hmm.
instincts can quite often be wrong, but your intuition is almost always infallible. It's pretty much right all the
Mm-hmm.
time. But the trouble is we let our mind, this part of the mind, and this is why I'm saying we live too much in our minds these days.
Mm-hmm.
We're convinced that this is the only answer. No, no, you don't get emotional. Think logically. This is what we're told. This is the constant message. Don't get emotional, right? Don't get emotional. You think with your head and not your heart. Well, I beg to differ. Yes, we should think things through, but quite often the answer has always been right here.
Mm-hmm.
Not your instincts, but your intuition. And there's the discernment. So in business,
Uh-huh.
same sort of thing. Same sort of thing. Your intuition is going to guide you. Is this person trustworthy? My intuition's telling me I should go this direction. Yeah, my head's telling me to be logic, but my intuition says go here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the ability to listen to that and not let these brains rule our lives. Because I'll tell you something about the primal brain. It is superbly designed to protect us. And whenever you try a new venture of any kind, it will lie, cheat, deceive, make excuses, create false pains in your body, everything, which are all psychological, by the way, everything to interrupt that. And if you want to read a great book on that, I'd highly recommend this book
Mm-hmm.
called The War of Art.
Uh-huh.
The War of Art. Because this was written by an award winning screenplay writer, and he talks about how creativity is a very difficult process. So every time you want to try something new, the brain will go out of its way to protect you, and it will
Uh-huh.
make up all sorts of phantom excuses. So this is another way we can look to use that in business and say, listen, is this a real concern, or is this a scenario being generated in my mind? And this is a real lifelong struggle to recognize what's going on and say, okay, where did this belief come from? What's
Mm-hmm.
holding me back? So that's how we apply that in business.
Les, do you have any tips on how to actually be able to listen to our intuition
It's,
and not,
that's a,
not think, not be in our heads and not, get confused?
I think, I think the first thing is just what we talked about is first
Mm-hmm.
just having an awareness of that, being
Uh-huh.
aware that, oh, okay, there's like three, four different things here working differently.
Mm-hmm.
So where am I operating? Like a person can ask themselves, where is this coming from? Is this coming
Mm-hmm.
from here in the heart? Is it coming from here? Is it coming from my emotional side? Where is this coming from? Just, I think the first step is self awareness
Uh-huh.
more than anything, you know, and kind of because it is a balance. It's we do have to think. I mean, we can't just like, oh, I have an intuition that I'm going to walk off a bridge, right? You know, but intuition isn't like that. Intuition, you just know it, it's just it's that thing that happens instantly, but it's you can always tell when there's interference happening where you have an intuition and then this part starts arguing and saying yeah, but what about this and what about this, and you'll quite often see this again even in our society, because our society, our primal brain is wired for conformity
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
a reason, because we have to keep society together, otherwise it falls apart. But
Mm-hmm.
about 30% of people are naturally wired as entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are not wired for conformity. They are there to be the disturbers. They push society forward. They technically they're called diversity generators. So you have
Mm.
70% conformity, 30% diversity generators, because otherwise everything would stay always the same, nothing would ever change. So there's this
Yes.
constant
Uh-huh.
battle going on, right? And you have to kind of recognize with I think entrepreneurs kind of recognize that, and they're always working on overcoming their own limiting beliefs, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that stuff comes from the internal, you know. And hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're wrong sometimes, but the ability to overcome the fear of failure and keep trying and trying and trying is the major difference. Whereas most people, they get one of those scars, so to speak. It's like, no, I already tried that. Well, how many times did you try it? It's like relationships. Oh, I tried a relationship once. Really? So that's it? You're just going to give up? so
Yeah.
so I
Wow.
would say
Yes.
that that's the key. Yeah, just self awareness to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So I think, not I think, I feel that you walked us through, um, like shaping our mindset, uh, to live better overall. And I love this.
I'm glad to hear that.
So this conversation, I think, is a complete guide to make changes and feel that we're more aligned with what we are and what we want to be, and
Hmm.
also to achieving integrity And yes, and bringing that to into our professional life and doing business as well.
Yep. Well, and listen, to that point, it's important that when you look around at other people, because we all do this, is try and compare ourselves to other people.
Yes, we do.
And that is one of the greatest mistakes. And it's a flaw. We all have it. It's just we all look around to see what everybody else is doing. But it's a real challenge because I can tell you, working with the amount of people that I work with on a weekly basis,
Hmm.
there are people that from the outside, from the exterior, you'd say, oh man, I wish I was them. They've got millions of dollars. Like this lady owns a $30 million farm. Oh, that would be so amazing. And then you find out, yes, she got staggering wealth, but she's struggling with crippling emotional issues that you wouldn't want to wish on your worst enemy.
Wow.
And I see this all the time where, and it's almost a cliche in the entertainment world. How many times have you seen somebody come from complete obscurity? They become wealthy and famous because they're
Uh-huh.
celebrated at what they do, and their
Hmm.
lives just completely self destruct. I mean, you could write a
Yes.
novel on this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Hmm.
And so it's, I found it's not a thing to be envious of other people because life is long and life is short. And so, you may not be blessed with, tons of financial wealth, but you may be rich in other areas that people only dream of. Like I know people have, very successful, but their family lives are just a shambles, you know? Or I had a really dear friend. He was 33 years old. He became a multi millionaire.
Hmm.
He wrote 5 books and then he died from colon cancer at 33. That was it. So I'm like, a person would be tempted to say, well, how does a guy that young make that much money? Well, it's because of a function. He had a lot of mentors. He had great mentors, which is another thing people don't really realize. And we didn't talk a lot about mentorship. But
Hmm.
what mentorship does is if you're trying to achieve a specific result, the best thing you can do, the most efficient way to succeed at whatever that goal is to find a mentor who has achieved that same result. It's just that simple. Because and people say, well, mentors cost a lot of money. Well, I was like, yeah, try trial and error though. Right? So, and I think I was sharing with you earlier, I had a friend that he witnessed my physical transformation. He's like, well, how did you do that? And so he hired me as his mentor. And I'll tell you, like, he got the results even faster than I did because by the time I'd figured it out, I was able to shortcut. So I was able to give him what I did in 5 months, he did in three, roughly. So mentorship dramatically accelerates what you're doing. And to distinguish that from, say, being a coach, sometimes coaching comes from a more academic standpoint. People will get
Hmm.
training, certifications, all that stuff. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. So phenomenal business coaches and coaches all around. But mentorship is different. Mentorship is where you're teaching from real life experience
Hmm.
and you're giving very clear firsthand knowledge. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where that works out too, and that's the distinction of why I don't really call myself a coach these days. I call myself a mentor. And if
Hmm.
I haven't lived that experience, I will not be mentoring you in it because that's not in integrity. That's
Hmm.
disingenuous. So I can mentor people on the stuff I've done in real life. So
So I want to thank you for all this wisdom. Thank you very, very much for sharing it.
oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure. It's nice. It's actually a real, to your point, what does it do for you as a person? The ability to share this story in the
Hmm.
hopes that it'll inspire others is that's a great reward unto itself. I love that. You know, the fact that I took this journey first, I figured out
Hmm.
how to do it, and now I can share it with other people. If they want to do the same thing, they just have to follow what I did.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the same is true of anything in my business career. People said, how were you a working musician at 16? Well, I figured a few things out. I figured out how to surround myself with people who were better than I was at a young age. I
Hmm.
didn't have to be the best. I just had to hire people smarter than me.
Hmm.
So And that was a real key to my success. Like when you dig down to the bottom, you'll find a lot of the people who succeed more quickly
Hmm.
is there's little things like that. It's just they're getting the right help earlier. The greatest advice I can give somebody is stop trying to do things on your own. Start
Ooh.
working with people who have already walked the path. Do what they do. You'll get the result much more quickly. That was one of my flaws. My father told me years ago. He goes, "Les, you've got blessed with talent, but your single greatest flaw is you don't want help." And it was a pride issue because I wanted to show people that I could do it. Well,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
I'm telling you from life experience, the best thing, don't do that. Enlist as much help as possible.
Okay. So, yes, get help. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Theorem Podcast. Connect with me on social media at Aspasia Provu and at theorem.podcast and share your thoughts. You may support us on Patreon. Visit the website aspasiaprovu.com/theorem for more. Τα λέμε σύντομα. Meaning talk to you soon in Greek. Aspasia's Theorem Podcast does not provide advice, medical or any other kind. It just presents the opinions of its host and guests. If you have any specific problems, please visit your physician or a medical expert for help. Anything said should not be taken as a replacement for medical, clinical, or professional advice, diagnosis, or medical intervention. The episodes of Aspasia's Theorem Podcast may, at times, cover sensitive topics, including, but not limited to, mental health, nutrition, health, politics, spirituality, alternative medicine, energy healing, and the use of plant medicines. You're advised to refrain from continuing if you are adversely impacted by any of these topics.